Let me share my screen. This is a new lunch and learn for us. We did this in a short 30-minute program back in 2020, whenever we were doing a lot of, on Thursdays, we were doing 30-minute programs every week there for months. But we've taken this and we've expanded it a little bit. It could easily be a 90-minute or even a 2-hour program. But we're going to do it in an hour today as our lunch and learn this month. So it's what to expect as dementia progresses. And we're just going to start again with that overview of dementia. It would be negligent for us not to just kind of go back and touch base on just what exactly is dementia, because there are an awful lot of people, even in healthcare, who don't fully understand just what is dementia. So many people will even interchange the words dementia and memory loss. Memory loss is a symptom. Memory loss is an effect. So let's look specifically at what is dementia. And you'll notice up here in the definition that you've got it's the loss of cognitive functioning and behavioral abilities that interferes with a person's daily life and activities. And memory is listed there first, but there's a whole lot of other things that are affected. Actually, whenever we study dementia, we know that there's about 35 or 36 common symptoms. It's not just memory loss. And those of you who are family caregivers, I see a lot of you on today, we most definitely know that. Losing that ability to have a judgment or to be reasonable or be rational, their language skills starting to change, their personality changing. And we will see the word behavior on some of our slides, but those of you who follow us and are on our programs know that we really are trying to get away from using that word behavior, and we're using the word expressions. Absolutely, sometimes they're challenging expressions, but we know that they are doing the very best that they can with what remains. And when I say what remains, it's because their brain is beginning to fail. Regardless of what type of dementia they have, their brain is failing. Their brain is dying. All dementias are progressive. All dementias are terminal. And what's happening, those neurons and the wiring in the brain it's a malfunction, and they stop working and they die. These brain cells it's a degenerative disease. And so it causes a steady decline in memory and in mental function. You may also notice on here movement and coordination. I was visiting with somebody yesterday, and we were even talking about, we call it that dementia shuffle. Whenever they start to really look down at their feet or even put their arms out to their side, they're shuffling their feet like they can't even pick their feet up. And we're going to talk today about something called the theory of retrogenesis, where it really is like they're kind of going back in time. And if you think about it, we haven't always been walking. And think about how when a child learns to walk, how they walk, where they'll kind of shuffle their feet, they'll put their arms out to their side, they'll pooch their belly out, trying to kind of keep their center, and they'll go back to that. This graphic is a really good one to help us understand. We've got the dementia effects, but that word dementia is an umbrella term. When you're trying to explain it to someone, an easy way to do it is to say, if someone were to come up to you and say, my loved one has cancer, the first thing we normally would ask is what kind or what type of cancer, because cancer is an umbrella term. The word dementia is also an umbrella term. There's over 130 different types, kinds, forms of dementia. So then we get that number one question that we're asked all the time: what is the difference in Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Of all of those many different types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. There's some studies that show that up to 80% of all dementias are Alzheimer's. You can find 60, 70, 80%. But there's also Lewy body dementia, there's vascular dementia, there's Parkinson's disease dementia, there are frontotemporal dementias. There are many, many different types of dementias. In this particular program, we're going to use the word dementia. We're going to watch some videos And you can find more information about Alzheimer's than you can about any other dementia because it's the most common one. And the way that the brain deteriorates is pretty similar, regardless of which type of dementia they might have. Here's another graphic that shows us, if we look at that brain, that healthy brain on the left, and then we see that deteriorated brain on the right, a healthy brain, those of us that are on the program, that healthy brain, we have a 3-pound brain. That's a healthy brain. If someone lives all the way till the end of dementia, if they die because of the end stages of dementia, they're going to have about a 1-pound brain. Now let's think about this. How in the world can we expect a person with a 1-pound brain to act and behave like a person with a 3-pound brain? We can't.
That's 12:30 when this is over.
Jamie, could you hit mute? We're just trying to keep everybody muted. And the other thing that we've got to realize is that dementia affects everyone differently. One of the things that we say, and I'll say it a couple of times throughout this program, is if you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen one person with dementia. Because we could line up 10, 20, 30, 100 people with dementia. They're going to have a few things in common. There's going to be some things that are similar. But if you were that primary caregiver for them, it's going to be different. And so I hear this over and over in our support groups. When I took care of my spouse, it was so different from when I was taking care of my mom. And they both had Alzheimer's. But it's a very individualized disease. The other thing with the dementias is as these disease progress, those symptoms and behaviors are going to change. We call them stages, where they may be going through a stage where they're repeating a lot, and then they stop. They may go through a stage where they're having some really challenging expressions, and then it stops. They go through changes because look at what's happening to that brain. As the brain is deteriorating, there's chemicals that are fluctuating. There's permanent structural damage taking place. One of the things that happens, and we're going to watch a video right after this slide, that's going to show that these changes start in the hippocampus. And as the disease progresses, it affects parts of the brain that control reasoning, understanding, impulse control, language, movement. They lose their filter. They'll say and do things that they never, ever would have said or would have done before because the brain cells are dying. The brain is actually beginning to, the medical term for it is it's beginning to atrophy, meaning that it's beginning to shrink. So to start with, before we jump right into each of the stages and what to expect with each of the stages, we're going to watch this 3-minute video, and it is understanding dementia in 3 minutes. Now, this one is specific to Alzheimer's, but most of the dementias progress in a similar way. So this is a easy to understand video.
What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's is a slow, fatal disease of the brain affecting 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. No one is immune. The disease comes on gradually as 2 abnormal protein fragments called plaques and tangles accumulate in the brain and kill brain cells. They start here in the hippocampus, the part of the brain where memories are first formed. Over many years' time, the plaques and tangles slowly destroy the hippocampus, and it becomes harder and harder to form new memories. Simple recollections from a few hours or days ago that the rest of us might take for granted are just not there. After that, more plaques and tangles spread into different regions of the brain. killing cells and compromising function wherever they go. This spreading around is what causes the different stages of Alzheimer's. From the hippocampus, the disease spreads here to the region of the brain where language is processed. And when that happens, it gets tougher and tougher to find the right word. Next, the disease creeps toward the front of the brain, where logical takes place. Very gradually, a person begins to lose the ability to solve problems, grasp concepts, and make plans. Next, the plaques and tangles invade the part of the brain where emotions are regulated. When this happens, the patient gradually loses control over moods and feelings. After that, the disease moves to where the brain makes sense of things it sees, hears, and smells. In this stage, Alzheimer's wreaks havoc on a person's senses and can spark hallucinations. Eventually, the plaques and tangles erase a person's oldest and most precious memories, which are stored here in the back of the brain. Near the end, the disease compromises a person's balance and coordination. And in the very last stage, it destroys the part of the brain that regulates breathing and the heart. The progression from mild forgetting to death is slow and steady and takes place over an average of 8 to 10 years. It is relentless and, for now, incurable. Helping your family, friends, and neighbors to better understand Alzheimer's will reduce stigma, improve care, and even help the fight for a cure. Thanks for helping to do your part.
Lots of really good information in that little short video. A couple of things I wanted to point out that I hope you heard him say. No one is immune. No one is immune. Dementia doesn't care. Dementia doesn't care if somebody's got a PhD, a master's degree, or a 5th grade education. Now, what we have found is that people who have higher levels of education many times can conceal the disease longer. They are very good at being able to sometimes have those social skills really stay in place, and we will be able to, I've had people go, you know, they're fooling people. And it's not that they're fooling people. Again, they're doing the best they can with what remains. But we see dementia in everybody. Another thing that he mentioned was language skills starting to change, logic, the ability to be reasonable and rational, and then the perception, and with perception, the senses. And we're going to talk more about each of those as we go through these stages. So what to expect in the earliest stages. The word that we're going to ask you to kind of keep in mind whenever you have a loved one, or if you're a professional and you're working with people in the early or the mildest stage, is normalization. This is where we want to keep things as normal as possible for the person who has dementia. We're going to come alongside, but we want to keep things as normal as possible. This slide has a whole lot of information on it, and you are going to get these slides again. Don't try to copy everything down, but I want you to just look at some of these things. This is what we expect in the early stages. Again, when we don't know anything about the disease and we hear the word dementia, sometimes we just think memory loss. All of these things that you see listed here are very normal for somebody who's in the early stages of the disease. Starting to get easily irritated with themselves and with other people because they're frustrated, because we're not understanding what they're trying to say to us. They know what they want to say and they can't get the words to come out. They may start to lose their way in familiar places, and they may not be able to find their way in a new place because that is new learning. And somebody in the early stages of the disease They really can't learn anything new. Think about these phones. Whenever our cell phone has an update on it, and we all have to go through learning, what did this just update? And we get frustrated, and we've got 3-pound brains. A person with dementia is not going to have any new learning. Their attention span may be shorter. It's harder to concentrate. We might start to see their hygiene start to decline. Now, I want you to think about why this is. There's an area in the brain that controls sequencing. What is next? What do I do after that step? What do I do after that step? And whenever that part of the brain is affected, and our loved one is in the bathroom standing at the vanity, and there's a toothbrush and toothpaste and a razor and shaving cream, and there's makeup, and there's just all this stuff on the vanity, and I don't know, I can still shave, and I can still put on my makeup, and I can still brush my teeth, but there's too much stuff out here, and I don't know the steps anymore. Again, normalization. We don't want to rush in there and do it for them. We want to clean off the vanity and have a toothbrush and a toothpaste, and then take that away and have a razor and a shaving cream, and then take that away and have the comb. They can still do it for themselves. Dignity, independence. They may start to skip steps in tasks because of those sequencing issues. Losing things. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, I lose things. That's right, you lose things, but you can retrace your steps. A person with dementia typically can't go back and do, why did I come in this room? Or we can step out and go, okay, why did I go in that room? Somebody with dementia can't retrace. They may start having a hard time early in the disease being able to interpret the background noise. Where I've got a sound machine going right now, they may hear that as rain. What is that? That sound that's coming in. Just having a really hard time starting to understand the changes with their senses. They start to withdraw from social situations simply because they understand they're not being able to keep up with the conversation. And they realize something's wrong. And they'll start to withdraw. They may start to use curse words, sex talk, racial slurs, words they've never used before, because those words are stored over here on the right side of the brain, and it doesn't deteriorate at the same rate as the left side, where our day-to-day language is stored. And also during the early stages, I get asked an awful lot, my loved one won't admit that they have this. They won't accept that they have this, and they may not recognize the illness. That's part of the illness, is not even being able to recognize the illness. Now, there are some things about the early stages of the disease. And again, we want to focus on what remains. We can't focus on what's gone. We've got to focus on what remains. Their social skills typically stay intact for a long time. And again, in these early stages, they can usually do most everything for themselves. They can still make decisions. We may have to bring it down to, do you want the hamburger or the hot dog? Because that menu has too much on it. But they can still make a decision. They can typically still read and comprehend what they're reading. So we may be able to leave some notes or use a whiteboard and put a calendar up on the whiteboard. Again, personality changes, mood swings are very common, and we'll see people really start to have some depression. Depression and dementia do tend to go hand in hand, especially in the early stages, because they realize something's going on. So in the early stages, this is when we talk about, when do we tell family and friends? And we think about, how are they going to react? Are they going to understand? This is the time The earlier, the better to start to educate yourself, to do classes like this, to get in a support group early. Keep communication open, talk about the feelings that everybody's having. It is scary. And to be able to go someplace and use those words, I don't even know what to do with these feelings. This is also a time to complete financial and medical decisions and paperwork so that the person who has dementia can be part of that planning. It is hard to talk about, but it's much easier when we do get to the end stage of the disease to sit there and know that you're doing what they wanted than to be sitting there looking at somebody like me going, what do I do? We never talked about it. We want to start a routine early in the disease. We want to make sure and start a routine. We also want to go and do the things that we want to do. Focus again on normalization. I found this really, really great video because we hear the word dementia, and I think we all have this idea of what dementia is. And this video is called Recognizing Early Dementia, and it is actual people who've been diagnosed speaking about their disease. Again, it's about 3 minutes.
There were times where coming home from work, I got lost. I ended up calling my wife saying, I don't know where the heck I am. A lot of it is just confusion. You hit these moments of thought.
When I left the house, I went to church and I had my clothes inside out. I didn't see it at all. My memory just blanks out.
If you picture a Christmas tree with lights, one starts to flicker a little bit. And you go over and you tap it and it goes back on. But then eventually that one that was flickering doesn't go on anymore. To me, that's what dementia is like. Dementia is an umbrella that covers many, many different types of cognitive impairments of brain diseases. Your memory changes, your emotion changes, personality changes. And then you start with confusion and disorientation.
For us to finally get the diagnosis took about 1.5 years. Process of elimination. Is it depression? Is it Lyme disease? An infection in the brain? You don't know what the heck is wrong with you, but you know something's wrong.
When I got diagnosed, it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Literally, it just overwhelmed me. I went through a horrible depression thinking life is over for me.
I'm sorry. The last thing on my mind was that I'd be dealing with what I'm dealing with right now. I would do anything to go back. So I'm not the same person I was.
There is no proof that any medication will slow down dementia. There are many research drugs out there. There's no proof that any of them are doing anything. There's no hope for a cure right now, but there is hope. There is hope.
Nobody wakes up the day after they get a diagnosis and all of a sudden they're end stage. This disease is a progression. Just because I have dementia doesn't mean that my life is over or that I don't want to contribute to my community, society in general, or especially my family.
Maybe I can't do everything I used to do the same way, but I can still do a lot. But we have to figure out how to do them differently, which means figuring out how to overcome the obstacles.
When you come to a bump in the road in your life, you have two choices. You can either move forward or you can stay stuck. I realized that I still was a valuable person. Get your ass up out of bed and live.
I'm trying as hard as I can, living a meaningful, purposeful life.
I don't want just to survive dementia. I want to thrive. I want those happy times to continue as long as they can.
Again, another really powerful video, and some of the words they use there, you heard people with early stage dementia using words like, I want to thrive. I need to have a purpose. I want to live a meaningful life. And even if our loved ones in the early stages don't say those things, we all have that need, a need to have that purpose and to be needed. Now, you may have heard the gentleman say that one of the things he did was he went to church and he had all of his clothes on backwards and inside out, and he didn't realize it. But if you were just sitting there visiting with him, like you just saw him on the video, you might think in just a little 2 minutes, well, he seems to be perfectly fine. And we get those family members and friends that aren't around our loved ones all the time who may think that. You also heard her compare dementia to a Christmas tree and the lights going out. That's a great analogy. Early, if one light goes out on a tree, we can just kind of move the tree, but eventually all those lights start to go out and eventually they dim and we can't hide it anymore. So it's a great way to think of it. You may have also noticed that the woman in the video had what was called mixed dementia. Mixed dementia now is the second most common type of dementia, and it simply means that she has at least 2 types of dementia. So many times it may be she has Alzheimer's and vascular at the same time. A person might have Lewy body and Parkinson's. It just means that they have 2 or more types of dementia. Let's talk about the second stage now and what we can expect during that middle stage. We like to call this middle stage the supportive stage of the disease. For the most part, they can still do many things for themselves, but now they need help. Where in the earlier stage, it was normalization and they needed reminders, they needed cues, they needed notes. But in this middle stage now, they are needing help. But again, we still want to make sure that they are doing as much as they can for themselves. So here, again, this is a busy slide. This one and the next one, you're going to get copies of these, are some things that we can expect to see. All of these things, if we see them, these are normal. These are things that we expect in the middle stages. Now, some people, we may see it in the earlier, the later, but for the most part, this is the middle stage. Language is really starting to change as that brain is starting to deteriorate, but you may see them singing or humming or using music more. Music is on the right side, and we said that right side doesn't deteriorate at the same rate as the left side, and music becomes really important. There's sequencing again. We talked about sequencing in the earlier stages, having those greater lapses in memory, and then being very disoriented to time. In fact, we'll get to the point that time doesn't even mean anything. We certainly can't say something like 3 o'clock, because what's 3 o'clock? That doesn't mean anything. But daytime, nighttime might still mean something. That's how we learned about time, was daytime, nighttime. We didn't start out saying to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old something about 3 o'clock. We said daytime, nighttime. During this middle stage, we may really start to see more of the challenging expressions. And again, I'm not using that word behaviors. We all have behaviors. Expressions. And it can come about because of anxiety. Anxiety can come out as rummaging. Anxiety can come out as pacing. And anxiety can come out as a challenging expression. They may also be overstimulated, hypersensitive during this stage. There's too many people, the lights are too bright, the noise is because they cannot filter out that background noise. During this middle stage, we may also see them not be able to recognize familiar people, because we've talked about that theory of retrogenesis where they're going back in time. And if I'm thinking I'm a 30-year-old woman and I'm looking at a husband with gray hair, that's not my husband, because my husband's not old. My husband doesn't have gray hair. I'm married to a young man because I'm a young woman. That's where I am in my mind. The changes in the senses are very evident during this time. And another thing is they'll lose they have a lack of self-awareness. They may start to use the word no a lot. No is one of the very first words that we learn, and that word no does tend to stay with us all the way through the end of the disease. They may, during the middle stage, also start to have sort of a flat affect on their face, But we definitely know that they are still there because their amygdala stays intact. Their hippocampus is dying. Their hippocampus is going away that holds all of the facts, but their amygdala stays intact, which holds emotions and feelings. They will do things that are surprising during the middle stage. And here, an example of that might be inappropriate sexual behavior. Going and getting in bed with somebody that isn't their spouse if they're placed. And we can get very surprised by that. When in reality, I want you to think about this. We've got somebody, I've slept in the bed with somebody for the last 50 years of my life, and it's time to go to bed and there's no one there. So they'll go and find a bed that has someone in it. That's actually not a sexual behavior. It's not even a behavior at all. It's somebody getting ready for bed. We just have to understand what's going on in their mind. I have a very hard time focusing on a conversation in the middle stages, and they may stop reading because during the middle stages, many times they'll still be able to read a word, but they don't comprehend what that word is. They can say it, but they don't know what it is. And also even watching TV sometimes can be a little bit difficult in the middle stages because they can't follow a storyline. Some of the other things that we can expect, and this is now with the caregiver, family, and friends in the middle stages. This is when, as family member, we've got to develop some coping skills and we've got to start building up that toolbox. Hopefully we start building that toolbox early. We're going to keep that routine. We're going to keep our rituals, but we have got to start having help in the middle stages. We might make it through the early stages, but by these middle stages, we are needing some help. We also have to learn how to not take this disease personally, because they may say and do some things that are very, very hurtful. And keep in mind, they're doing the best they can with what remains. They may do some things, especially if we're out in public, we're at church, we're at a restaurant, that could even be embarrassing. But we don't want to stop taking them out. We learn how to work around that, or we get the little cards that we can put on the table in the restaurant that says, please excuse my loved one, they have dementia. We adjust expectations. We adapt to the disease. They can't, they would if they could. And I've got a sign here in my office that says a person with dementia is never giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. It's during the middle stages of the disease that a lot of people are placed into a long-term care or in assisted living. Next, let's look at this short video about the middle stages. I believe this is 2 minutes.
The one word we've got is hope, because there's lots of things you can still do at this age. You're still very functional. You just have early stages of Alzheimer's, and that has to be guided as things progress. And this is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. Then we're going to get into the middle phase. What's the middle phase like, Monica?
The middle phase is the most challenging phase, particularly for caregivers. They've already dealt with the diagnosis, accepted the diagnosis, and this is a stage that requires so much care. And this is a stage that can be isolating because a patient is still able to get out and about, still talking, still walking, and may have preserved activities of daily living, still perhaps uses the bathroom by themselves, etc. And now they require a lot of day-to-day care, maybe in dressing, maybe in just doing simple activities.
Being with the patient, arm in arm, not letting them go out by themselves, middle stage as it progresses.
Yes, I think that you see more wandering at this phase, and that can be really frightening for a caregiver. What I see is that exhaustion and burnout. So it is important to also seek help. Let's say if you're starting to experience depression, anxiety, sleep problems, to really talk to your primary care doctor about those issues. That is unfortunately extremely common.
Sure.
And then the other thing that actually comes up quite frequently are many times, especially if it's a younger early onset disease, there's a tremendous loss of income. So there's financial strain at this phase.
I bet you that would be, and finances are often strain on every couple. So an added, not planned for, stress would be really very, very difficult for people. So that's the caregiver. Well, what's going on with the patient now as they're advancing in middle stage? What are they doing and not being able to do? And what are the problems?
Well, if you can imagine, there's a loss of initiative, not able to plan one's day. So you take someone who's highly successful and really not able to do much of anything without that initiative of a caregiver. So it's that constant care that is really challenging. And I encourage time off again.
Can the caregiver say, let's go out for a walk, honey? And are they able to go out for a walk and manage stair steps and
It
manage?
depends on the illness.
Yeah, so it depends on how far.
And it depends on the person too.
Sure. So it depends on their strength and their size and what other problems they've got. I think the best thing is that there are services available for both the caregiver and for the patient. The one word.
So I think there it was important to take away, they lose their initiative. In that middle stage of the disease, if there is not structure to the day, we'll catch them doing a whole lot of nothing because they do not have the initiative to do anything on their own. Now, they can still do an awful lot, but we've got to prompt, we've got to come alongside, and we've got to assist. You also heard her use that word for the first time. This is where we start having lots of family caregivers hitting the wall, burnout, compassion fatigue, emotionally just no longer being able to do this. That's why there's a lot of placement during that middle stage. Now, let's get to this last stage, what to expect in the last or the advanced stage. And we're going to call, so the first stage we talked about normalization, the second stage we talked about supportive, and this third stage is all about comfort. They are at a time that we call this also a sensory stage. They can communicate with their senses. We can communicate with them through their senses. This is a maximum need, and it's for the person with dementia and for the caregiver. Some of the things that we expect is that they're going to become total care during this time. Being able to even recognize themselves goes away. Now, that's hard for us to understand. How can they not even recognize themselves? There comes a time that they don't even know that they are, if that makes sense. Now, they may still recognize family, but not be able to call a name or be able to say, that's my son. And again, theory of retrogenesis, we're going back to who they originally were. They did not have grandchildren. They didn't have children. They didn't have a spouse. Who have we always had? We've had a mama and a daddy. That's who we've always had. So many, many times they'll look in the face of their husband and say, daddy, or they'll look in the face of an adult child and say, mama. Those are also usually very safe people. This is a repetitive time as well, where they'll start having repetitive motion. We may have them doing a lot of rocking. They may actually be tapping or hitting on something. Their hands may be going, they may pick at things in a repetitive type movement. All that is self-soothing. They're self-soothing. You may self-soothe. I rock. You may have your leg going up and down. You may sit and fidget with a pen. You're self-soothing also. During this stage, they typically can no longer feed themselves. If they can, it's typically with their fingers. Again, going back to who they were. Originally, we were fed, and then we used our fingers, and then a spoon, and then a fork, and then a knife, and they go away in that order. The knife goes first, and then the fork. They'll use the spoon for a long, long time, and then we'll go to finger foods, and then we'll need assistance at mealtime. They're going to sleep for long periods of time in the late stage of the disease. Their body needs it. They need to rest. Just like that newborn or that very young child needs to rest. Their gross motor skills are affected, and typically at the end stages, they're no longer walking. And when they stop walking, there's a lot of falls, just like when we start walking, there's a lot of falls. for the caregiver during this time. We have really got to be observant, look, listen, and feel to meet their needs. They're probably going to get down to about 10 words. No is going to be one of those words. And we may go up and say, "Are you in pain?" And they say, "No," but they've got a furrowed brow and their face is squinched up and they're holding their side. They're saying yes, but they're using the word that's left, no. We've got to pay attention to their full body. Music and touch is the best way to connect with them. You heard Jamie say we're doing our class on compassionate touch coming up very soon, because we tend to stop touching people at the late stages of the disease, and that's when they need it more. Theory of retrogenesis, going back in time. What do we do to somebody under the age of 3 that's crying or upset or hurt? We hold, we touch, we rock, we pat. And we don't always have to say anything. And this is what they need at the end of the disease. They need it throughout the disease. We've got to touch and hold and let there be silence. Sometimes we can cause one of those challenging expressions because we want to talk. We want to fill the silence, and they're fine with there being silence. It's also during this stage of the disease that they're going to go on hospice. Quality of life. And hospice does not mean the person is imminent. Hospice means that we think they have 6 months or less. I've had residents be on hospice for 2 and 3 years sometimes because they have a progressive disease and they're a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. We want to get on hospice as soon as we can and allow that extra layer of care to come in. Some of the things that we can do is to make sure and still have that social and emotional activity. Have family and friends come in to visit, but sometimes we have to teach them how to visit. Encourage them to take classes, encourage them to sit in on support groups. One of the things we can do earlier in the disease is take advantage of an adult day program so that our loved one is getting out and still being able to be social and we're getting a break. Doing that cognitive stimulation with our loved ones or people who have dementia and using reminiscence therapy. Physical activity, as long as they can do any type of physical activity, and having those sensory stimulations, music, again, all the way till end of life. So important. And there's education and support for that caregiver. Here's that theory of retrogenesis that I've been talking about. And what it means is the brain of a person with dementia deteriorates in the reverse order that the brain was developed from birth. So it is literally like they are going back in time. They just are in the body of a 60, 70, 80-year-old. But that brain is going from a 3-pound brain down to that 1-pound brain. Eventually, at the end of the disease, we have to focus on having a good death. And that's hard to think about. I was visiting with some people about this yesterday. We can panic as the loved one and say, do everything possible. But we've got to step back and say, what are we prolonging? We're prolonging a progressive terminal illness. And who are we making those decisions for? There comes a time that we're not going to have any more hospital visits. That's the worst place for somebody with dementia to be. And the final video I want us to see, the Alzheimer's Society does some fantastic videos, by the way. Get on YouTube and look up Alzheimer's Society. They're out of the UK. But this is a husband after his wife has passed, talking about her starting to come back to him. This is very, very powerful about the end stage of dementia.
This was, still is to me, Jan. died on the 22nd of August, after probably around about 25 years with dementia, right from the very first sign to her passing gently in her sleep peacefully. I can think of no more difficult situation than long-term dementia. I really can't. I mean, I've had family members with cancer, I've had family members with heart problems, all sorts of stuff. I can't think of a single thing which is worse than dementia, because with dementia, there is no hope. In truth, I'm rejoicing that she's free of it and that she's at peace now. Jan and I were close, really, really close. My mum said, you can't see where Jan stops and Bruce begins, because I can't explain it. We were just so close. We never, ever had an argument, not once. At the time when Jan was at the stage of needing it, there was very little help available. So we had no respite, we had no people coming in. It was just me trying to look after her, plus hold down a full-time job. So many people didn't visit her because they said, we want to remember her as she was. And, oh, God, I go mad at that. Because that denies the person as they now are. And they're the same person, for God's sake. It's just this wall comes down, which stops them communicating with you and stops them communicating with their own body and stuff. But if you say, well, I want to remember them as they were 20 years ago, then what good's that? Useless. When speech goes, and I think her hearing was a bit dodgy as well. Couldn't tell because you couldn't ask her because she couldn't answer. So you have to find ways of communicating. And increasingly what I was doing was putting my forehead on her forehead, because I think she picked up the vibrations of my voice, because she certainly did respond to that. You'll find that you go for months without any obvious response. And then one day you say something, just not expecting anything, and she'd say, yes. Where did that come from? You suddenly realize that they're in there all the time. They just haven't got the means of getting out. And what you've got to do is you've got to try and, more than ever, get into their worlds and try and find some way of making contact. At the end, August 16th, Jan stopped eating and drinking. I spoke to the GP, and the GP said, I think she's just tired of it all. So it was 6 days later she passed away, but I spent the last days with her all day long, holding her hand, talking to her. And that was the really important point. I had the opportunity to be with her, and it gave me time to say all the things I needed to say to her. In all these things, I'm looking at Jan, dementia, and I want to get back to Jan before dementia. So, and that's already happening. I was on a walk the other day. Well, I like to walk around a little bit, and I got a kind of a sliver of Jan as she was way before dementia came. And so I think she's coming back to me now.
Those words, she's coming back to me now. And doing the support groups, that is what I hear over and over and over again. On the other side of this disease, is I hear families use words like peace and joy. And you heard him even say, I'm rejoicing that she's free and is at peace. We are never praying or hoping that our loved one dies. We're never doing that, but we are praying and hoping that this disease end. And it is so hard. You heard him also use the word 25 years. Now that is very, very, very uncommon. I've known one person who went 23. That's really uncommon. But you also heard him use those words that this was some of the most intimate times that he had with her, that at the end stage, he would literally put his forehead on her forehead. And those words had been said again in support group over and over, that this continues to be an intimate relationship when you know how to do it. He still had a relationship with her. Was it what he had planned for their whole life? No, it was not. Was it what he thought it was going to be? It wasn't, but he found a way to still have a relationship with her. I also want to point out that he mentioned she stopped eating and drinking, and 6 days later she passed. Now we need to talk about this when we're being really honest and truthful about what to expect. Here's a sentence that's important to hear. Please, please hear this and file it. A person with dementia does not die because they stop eating. They stop eating because they are dying. A person with dementia does not die because they stop eating. They stop eating because they are dying. The body knows how to shut down. And in people with dementia, digestion shuts down first. Food is fuel, and they don't need the fuel anymore. And you heard the gentleman in the video say that the doctor said, I think she's tired. And the way that the body dies is that it dehydrates. But we tend to come running in and go, no, 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 we've got to give them food, or we've got to give them fluid. And that's for somebody who's getting better. And he said hers was 6 days. It's normally 3 to 5. Once they stop eating, it's normally 3 to 5 days. And we don't want to try to force somebody, and we don't want to go put in a feeding tube, because if digestion is shut down and we put a feeding tube in, that's a disaster. And it can cause a whole lot of pain and discomfort. But he said, she's coming back to me. And I remember Jan the way that she was. And again, I hear that over and over in support group, where people will say, I dream now before dementia. The dementia's gone. They're free of it. So how do we treat this disease? We're doing it right now. You're doing it by being on a program like this with knowledge that you then pass on and share. You build your skills. You commit. Boy, are we flexible. We practice and we have compassion. And I want to share this. And I'm going to use the word dementia instead of Alzheimer's. There is one thing dementia cannot take away from us, and that is love. Because love is not a memory. It's a feeling, and it stays in a person's heart and soul, and it never leaves. I've watched it too many times in my career. Love does not go away. It stays. There's our information. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We've got a few minutes left. Let me see if anybody has any questions. You can put in the chat, or you can unmute. Somebody had put in sensitive to sound and temperature. Absolutely. You'll notice that a person with dementia, it's like their thermostat goes awry. They are cold all the time. The last quote, is that about eating? Is that what you're talking about? The last slide up. Oh, sure. Yes, the last slide. Let me put that up again.
And I think, Holly, they do want you to repeat what you were saying about eating as well.
Yes, about eating. A person with dementia does not die because they stop eating. A person with dementia stops eating because they are dying. The body knows they don't need the food anymore, because food is fuel. There's that slide. Oh, I see stuff in the chat now. The one before the live slide. That one, I'm not sure. You're going to get these slides though. You'll get them this afternoon. So just in case I'm not getting the right one up, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have questions, comments? I know that's a lot of information and it's some pretty heavy stuff, but that is one thing that we do here is we're always honest with you, and we're always here to talk about all of this. That's why we have our support groups, and that's why we do these classes. The dementia can be treated slide. There it is. I finally got the right one. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Like Jamie said, you're going to get a copy of this. It's also going to be up on our YouTube. Plus, you're going to get all of our slides. Somebody asked, do they stop paying bills? Yes, they stop paying bills. They will stop paying bills, or they might pay them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. So yes, money becomes an issue very early because that has to do with numbers and sequencing also, and it has to do with time.
And I will say, quick reminder, you'll get a copy of the slides. You'll also get information of our upcoming programs and support groups. And you'll get a link to the recording, but also the evaluation. We do ask that everybody complete the evaluation. We really do appreciate your honest feedback. But if you want the CE credit for social work, nursing, LPC, or a certificate of attendance, you are required to fill out the survey. I hate to say required, but we really need you to do that. So, and then just allow us several weeks to get those processed and get them back out to you by email.
Thank you. Somebody did ask at what stage is your day program no longer possible or practical? So day program is for the earliest stages, while they are still able pretty much to do all of their own ADLs, those activities of daily living. There does come a time that we use the word appropriate. They're no longer appropriate for the day program. Yeah, day program and most all day programs that I've ever known of are for the earliest stages, while they can still really be social. All right, thanks everybody. Y'all have got our information. If you've got any other questions, you can shoot us a text or you can give us a call. We appreciate it. See you soon. Bye-bye.